The Liberal government avoided its first confidence vote on Wednesday evening as MPs adopted the throne speech. When debating legislation in the House, the Speaker will ask MPs request a recorded division or a standing vote. If no MP asks for one, the motion is deemed adopted. No MP asked for recorded division on the throne speech when the time to vote came, meaning it was passed without MPs standing to vote.
Adopted in reply to His Majesty's speech at the opening of the first session of the 45th Parliament, and C, the address be engrossed and presented to Her Excellency the Governor-General by the Speaker.
All those opposed to the honourable members moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Carried.
The adoption came despite interim NDP leader Don Davies saying that his party would be voting against the throne speech earlier Wednesday.
And yet the throne speech doesn't even mention the words healthcare. You won't even find those words in the throne speech. There is no mention of non-market housing, cooperative housing, or housing for Indigenous people, some of the most acute needs in this country when it comes to affordable housing. And it foreshadows $28 billion in cuts that will absolutely hurt working people across this country. So we will be voting no against the throne speech and making sure that the interests of working people across this country are reflected, and we'll continue to fight for those measures that we know that so many millions of Canadians and working families need in this country.
If the throne speech had proceeded to a standing vote, the Liberals would have needed another opposition party to survive the confidence vote. Our correspondent Wyatt Sharpe joined us now to unpack the Liberal Party surviving their first confidence vote. Wyatt, thanks for the time today.
Of course, thank you.
Now, why do you think no MP requested a recorded vote, especially given that the NDP publicly stated their opposition earlier that day?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the procedural questions that oftentimes people who follow kind of the House of Commons and politics closely don't really think a whole lot of, but someone who is watching perhaps from the outside, it might make them wonder a little bit. I would say kind of the primary reason for that is just MPs knowing the direction as to where things were headed, and they perhaps didn't want to waste a lot of time. I mean, you had mentioned the NDP interim leader who said that his party would be voting against it. That's contrary, though, to the Bloc Québécois, who had said that they would support the throne speech regardless, given that there really hasn't been a resolution in the US-Canada trade talks, and they feel going to another election right now would contribute to greater instability. So the government already had kind of enough people confirming that they would vote in favor of it, that it's likely the Conservatives and the NDP just didn't see a point in requesting a vote so that the inevitable could happen.
And how much do you think that not possibly forcing another election played into there not being a recorded vote?
Yeah, and it was interesting to me even that the NDP had came out and said that they were going to vote against the throne speech. And I think a little bit of that probably has to do with the interim leader, Don Davies, perhaps wanting himself to be in the spotlight for a little bit. If the party had went to an election, he would have been the face of the party, because the reality is the NDP won not even official party status in the last election campaign. Their fundraising is in a really bad state right now. Their polling numbers and overall kind of popularity for their party is not in a great state either. So it was interesting to me that the NDP seemed to be advocating for another election despite that. The Bloc Québécois, all things considered, didn't do that horribly in the last election. They only lost a couple of seats, so they're pretty comfortable with where they are at right now. And so it's certainly partially that. But again, also, as I mentioned, this idea that people don't want to force another election when the opinions of the country really aren't going to have changed that much since April. I mean, maybe some people's opinions will differ, but certainly someone who voted for Mark Carney in April, it's hard to kind of pick out people who wouldn't be willing to vote for him not even 2 full months later.
And what do you think was the reasoning behind the NDP saying that they would vote against it and then not doing it?
Yeah, well, again, that's kind of more of the procedural stuff. The reasoning for the NDP saying they didn't want to support the throne speech, Don Davies, you had played the clip there where he was talking about why the NDP wasn't going to be supporting it. For reasons that you would expect, they are unhappy with some of the cuts that the government is making in order to try and get back to a certain level of fiscal responsibility. The NDP is unhappy with how the government is approaching the issue of U.S.-Canada trade talks. The NDP interim leader had said that he feels Mark Carney is kind of bowing down to Donald Trump now and is not really taking this threat as a credible threat and not taking it seriously. I mean, the NDP, I think if it did come to a standing vote, they certainly would have voted against it. Again, it's just a matter of they didn't want to waste the time. They didn't want to go into this vote where they already had enough kind of verbal confirmations of people saying they would vote in favor of it.
And do the results likely mean that if there was a recorded vote, the Bloc would have backed the Liberals?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, I think the Bloc Québécois certainly right now is looking at the situation that's unfolding. They recognize that, well, they didn't make any substantial gains for their party in the last election campaign. Things went much better than the polls were suggesting for them. Things went much better than they potentially could have for the Bloc Québécois. And so that party's leader, I think, is playing this under kind of the guise of, not wanting to risk going to an election to contribute to greater instability over the course of the trade war without having kind of a formal resolution or a former trade deal in the form of something like maybe the USMCA from 2017. But again, I think the reality of this is that a lot of it probably comes down to politics, and the Bloc Québécois usually is kind of the party where people, specifically in Quebec, will go when they're feeling apathetic towards the state of politics. And I think since April, perhaps the level of apathy has went down even just a little bit, and so the Bloc recognizing they probably wouldn't gain as much support.
And how significant is it that the Liberals avoided a formal confidence test on this speech? Does that kind of set the tone for future confidence votes?
Well, I mean, certainly you saw a number of confidence motions over the course of specifically 2021 up until the election that happened in 2025. And the reason the Liberals were able to survive all of them was because the NDP and Jagmeet Singh were willing to back them and willing to support them. Now, this is perhaps an indication that Don Davies and the NDP will not be willing to do so with this particular government, because, of course, now the NDP is going to, want as many opportunities as possible to try and win back some seats for their parties. As I mentioned, they don't even have official party status right now. The Bloc Québécois might be kind of the safety net right now for the government, but that's likely to change again after there is a resolution with some of these trade talks, where then the Bloc Québécois might have some own frustrations. I mean, certainly right now they are unhappy with the Energy East pipeline and the situation surrounding that, how the government and Danielle Smith are trying to talk about potentially bringing it back. Quebecers and Yves-François Blanchet, the provincial government in Quebec, all of them are very unhappy about that. So that could be perhaps one reason why, in a few months when there is a resolution on the trade talks, maybe the Bloc Québécois will be a little bit more eager to go into an election.
Now, to switch gears, David Eby came out yesterday and said that he wouldn't support an oil pipeline going through BC.
Mhm.
How much does this speak to Mark Carney's unity goal that he set for the country?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's interesting, right? Because I just mentioned the Quebec example,
Mhm.
people who are opposed to it, people in British Columbia who are opposed to it, and then you look to all, the Prairie provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, even Manitoba under Wab Kinew, who, they are generally speaking in favor of it. Ontario doesn't really have as big of a role to play with it, but certainly they are in favor of it as well. So, I mean, it is just kind of this big game. I mean, the provinces, I'm not going to say that the kind of state of intergovernmental affairs under Justin Trudeau was great, but certainly Chrystia Freeland and some of the other people around the cabinet table under Justin Trudeau, it seems, might have had more leverage with some of these provincial premiers than they do under Mark Carney. I think people recognize that it's because Mark Carney is kind of more of a moderate, and so people on the left-wing side of the spectrum feel as if they can convince him to their side. People on the right side of the spectrum feel as if they can convince him to their side, whereas people knew Justin Trudeau had his opinions. They weren't going to persuade him either way, and so it was kind of much more defined as to how people approach these types of conversations under Trudeau as compared to Mark Carney.
And following the First Minister's meeting, how much do you think that Danielle Smith's tone has changed towards Mark Carney? Initially she was a bit more closed off, but it is starting to seem like her narrative towards Mark Carney is changing.
It's interesting, yeah. I mean, even we just had reports from a few days ago that Danielle Smith had invited Mark Carney to go to an Edmonton Oilers game with her to talk about some of these issues. You mentioned the First Minister's meeting. There were clips of the two of them talking with one another. It's no secret, of course, that the relationship between Danielle Smith and Justin Trudeau was not a very strong or positive one. So certainly, it's not really a stretch to say that anything would have been an improvement from that relationship. So moving forward, it will be interesting. I think this, again, issue of the Energy East pipeline could be kind of, a potential point for more contention with respect to all of this. But there will likely be some similarities too. I mean, Alberta certainly has a role to play in some of these trade discussions. I talked to you earlier about the memorandum that was signed between the various provinces on free trade. Danielle Smith is certainly looking to be in favor of that and is supporting that as well. And so there might be more room for collaboration between her and Mark Carney as opposed to her and the previous government.
Wyatt, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.